Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back, and thanks for being here for our very last webinar this afternoon. And it is actually 1:56, but I see that the three of you are already signed back on, and I think you're going to be the only ones on. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I am going to reiterate the announcements that I made earlier, so bear with me. I just want to make sure everybody hears them. We are for a couple of training opportunities that are coming up. Our registration for our PIP conference, or our Partners in Prevention conference, just opened up. And again, the dates for that are May 23rd and 24th. I'm going to send you guys an email about how you can register for free. And I'm also going to be able to cover a night, that night in a hotel for you. And I just need you to let me know if that's something that you're interested in. Oh, and food will be provided as a part of the conference. So during the conference hours, food will be provided. And then there's also going to be a webinar coming up on April 20th to talk about, it's a state meeting, but it's also talking about marijuana and cannabis use and kind of trends right now as we're going through some cultural changes in the country. Ashley's going to be following up with you guys on looking at some dates for conference calls and getting signed up for your group me, where you're going to be able to have some conversations amongst just yourselves. And then next steps are to start creating a budget and looking at your actual campaigns and events. So lots of exciting stuff coming up. And I will send you some follow-up stuff when I send your links to all of these videos later this afternoon. So with that, I am going to jump in and start talking about bystander intervention. So bystander intervention is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So I'm looking forward to this. I will tell you that my computer's been running a little slow. So there may be a couple moments where she's struggling a little. So we'll just have patience. So as we move into talking about bystander intervention, I will tell you that I'm going to talk about this at least predominantly, or at least some, from a sexual violence prevention background. That's kind of where I came from, and that is also where a lot of the research and curriculum and ideas around bystander intervention has kind of grown up, is through the sexual violence and gender-based violence sort of field. But while I talk about that, I want you guys to think about the connections, because the reality is the bystander intervention applies to many different areas and kind of many different sort of opportunities where you might be able to confront someone about risky decision making. I mean, we can apply it to the idea of drug and alcohol use, impaired driving, and we're going to look even at the end at some campaigns that have kind of incorporated the idea of bystander intervention, and some examples that you could actually go and look at if you were interested in that. So I am hoping to have at least a little bit of interaction. So I wanted to practice here at the beginning by asking you guys to use your chat box and to tell me your favorite superhero. So if you will just type into the chat box and hit send, you don't have to raise your hand. You can just click send to tell me your favorite superhero. I have small children, so I think about my favorite superhero a lot. So my current favorite superhero is actually the Flash, because I'm watching the Flash series, which is really good. So, all right, I see one response here. I've got one for Wonder Woman, also a really good one. Anybody else? Willing to tell me your favorite superhero by tapping it into the chat box at the bottom. Okay, and so there's also often a delay. So if I see your answer pop up, then I'm going to come back to it. Also know that I'm running all of this by myself this afternoon. So again, be patient. All right, so we'll see if we can get some interaction. If not, no worries. We will just, we'll move with it. Just know that I really like hearing what you have to say. So I'm hoping to have a little bit of that this afternoon. All right, so we are going to talk just a small amount about some theory around bystander intervention, and then we're going to look specifically at some strategies. And just a little bit, we'll talk about some actual scenarios. So as I mentioned, this is a topic where I look at it and kind of bring in this idea of sexual violence prevention. So please just kind of be aware, take care of yourselves as you need to. This can be, some of the stories may be a little bit more difficult. And so just do what you need to do to take care of yourself. And so when we pose this idea of kind of what is a bystander, that's usually kind of how I start this conversation, is just, kind of breaking it down to, what is a bystander? What do we mean when we talk about a bystander? And so at the base, what we're talking about is somebody who is present and in a position to discourage, prevent, or interrupt an incident. So really, they're the one that's there when something is going down. That's what a bystander is. And so when we talk about somebody who is an active bystander, we're talking about a person who actually makes a decision to try and impact the situation in a positive way. And when we're a bystander, we have three options. We can choose to do nothing, which is a choice. We can choose to try and impact the situation in a positive way and be an active bystander, or we can also choose to impact the situation in a negative way that actually escalates the violence or the situation. So those are all the choices that we have. So if we're going to be an active bystander, there's a couple things we have to think about. We have to make sure that our goal is to de-escalate whatever the situation is. And the other thing is, and hold on just a second. Okay, I've got somebody telling me that they can't see my PowerPoint. All right, hold on just a moment. So it does say it's showing a screen. Shawnee, can you tell me if there's anything that you do actually see? And while I wait for her response, I will just kind of reiterate and talk about the active bystander piece, in the sense that what we're looking for is somebody who is actually taking their own safety into account. So we don't want people to just put on those superhero capes and run into any situation and every situation that comes up, because that may actually escalate things. So our goal is to keep our own safety in account and to try and de-escalate the situation and to make it a positive impact on whatever it is that's happening in front of us. All right. So hold on just a moment. Appears as though if anybody else is having issues seeing the PowerPoint, it would be helpful for me to know that. I'm going to try one more thing, and if you will, let me know if that makes a difference. And so I have a quote here that says, "I always wondered why somebody didn't do something about that, and then I realized I am somebody." And I really like this quote because it kind of gets to this idea of, most of the time, if we get that feeling in our stomach, going with superheroes, we'll call it our spidey sense, that that something is wrong or that we want to do something. We recognize that feeling, and so often we feel pulled, but we're not sure what to do. And so really one of the goals of bystander intervention is to help give people the skills that they need to actually do something in a safe way that kind of de-escalates. All right, and I see that she can see it now, so we are good. And so as we talk about, though, bystander intervention, and now my PowerPoint is not responding. My goodness, my computer is not happy with doing two back-to-back presentations this afternoon. So it'll catch up. But basically, when we start talking about, the skills and knowing how to respond in a bystander situation, one of the first things that we have to be able to do is actually recognize who the potential bystanders are in a scenario. So I'm going to ask you all to listen to a story, and I'm going to what I'd like you to do is kind of think through who the potential bystanders in that story are. So you may be, I'm going to restart this PowerPoint just so you guys know. So you may be familiar that back in 2013, we actually had an incident at Vanderbilt University where a woman was assaulted by multiple people on Vanderbilt's campus. And so I'm going to give you kind of the overview of what happened that night. And I want you to think about who, and this is a very, high level, just a few details, but I want you to think about who those bystanders were, or who those potential bystanders were that evening. All right. So this woman and another guy were at a bar, and they were drinking. She got very intoxicated and was, blacked out drunk. And they left the bar. And then at that point, they made their way back to the dorm. All right. So they get to the campus. And when they're on campus, there are people milling around. It's about 11 o'clock at night. And the gentleman sees a couple of his teammates who are there. And he enlists their help to take her from the car to the dorm and then through the halls and up to his dorm room. When they get to his dorm room, there's actually his roommate was on the top bunk in his room, and then they assaulted three of them assaulted her at that point, and then after that they took her back from that room. They took her back through the halls to a different room, and that's where she woke up the next day. And so, what I want you to think about for a moment is who in that scenario were the potential bystanders. And I got my picture back up here. So if you will think just for a minute, if you can type into the box, tell me who some of the potential bystanders were that evening in that particular scenario. Can anybody think through some of those potentials? I see. Bartender. All right, let me pop this out so we can read. You've got multiple ones here. Great. So I see bartender, football player who helped take her to the room, people walking by in the dorms, and the roommate on the top bunk. Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thank you for that. So you got a lot of them. Yeah. So starting at the very beginning of the night with that bartender, I would add in if there were any friends at the bar of either person, because as a bystander we can be connected either to either any person in the scenario. Like you mentioned, people walking by at the dorm. The football teammates were a really good example of people who were bystanders who then made a choice to make the situation worse, actually, rather than making a positive impact. There could have been front desk workers, there could have been people in the hallway, and yeah, absolutely, the roommate on the top bunk. So these are all people who, in that situation, had the opportunity to be bystanders. So as we talk about bystander intervention, I'm going to use the 5 steps of bystander intervention to kind of frame the conversation, because once we kind of know who those potential bystanders are, we got to think about, how we can actually be better bystanders. So the 5 steps are noticing that something is happening, recognizing that something is wrong and actually needs intervention, taking the responsibility to do it, knowing how or having some skills, and then actually going forward and doing something. So if you are somebody who really likes to know kind of what the theory is, there's multiple social behavior theories that are a part of the different curriculums on bystander intervention. But for this 5-step process, the theory of planned behavior is what is the social behavior theory behind this. Now, there's also research on helping behaviors that we're going to talk about in a little bit that's also a part of this particular model. But the theory of planned behavior says that if a person's going to be an active bystander, then they've got to have individual attitudes and beliefs that oppose the violence. They've got to perceive that the social norm is to intervene, and they've got to believe that they've got the knowledge or the ability to actually intervene. So we've got to have values and beliefs. We've got to have a perception of the social norm, which you guys have talked about before, and we've also got to have some self-efficacy. All right, so that is what we're trying to look at when we talk about these kind of 5 steps of bystander intervention, is how do we develop each of these to get ourselves into a place where we feel confident actually intervening. So I'm going to try, we'll see how this works. I'm going to show you guys a video. So as we go through each one of these steps, I'm going to show you guys an awareness video. Now, the sound doesn't work, but it is captioned, and I'm also going to walk you through it. So it's very short. So it's going to start now, and it says awareness test. And you should see the team. It says, how many passes does the team in white make? So you're going to watch and count. So the answer is 13. That's how many passes. But did you see the moonwalking bear? So you'll watch again. And it says it's easy to miss something that you're not looking for. So I think this is a really great. Now, it may have been a little bit lagged for you guys, so I will send the link for that video when I send the link for the recording. But basically, it's just driving home the point that we're not going to see things that we're not looking for. So if we want to be active bystanders, one of the first things that we have to do is we've got to start paying attention to what's going on around us. And so that's just kind of a fun way of driving at that point. And the second step of bystander intervention is also noticing that something is wrong. And so I want you to take a moment and just think about what are some ways or some red flags that you might see in some of the scenarios or circles that you travel in that might let you know that something is wrong, or kind of set off that spidey sense that you need to intervene in some way. So just think about that for a minute, and then I'll give some examples. You're welcome to share if you would like. So some possible things that people might give people a sense that something is wrong. If somebody is getting their keys and getting ready to leave a party when they've obviously been drinking, if somebody is encouraging another person to drink more when they know that they're already intoxicated and trying to always keep a drink in their hand, if somebody is shouting or threatening at a partner. These are all kind of examples of things that we can pay attention to in order to know that, there might be the possibility or the opportunity to intervene in some way. So that is all kind of part of paying attention to what's going on and then starting to notice more when there are potential red flags around you. And I see a couple of you responded the way that a guy has his arm around a girl at the club or bar, like tied around the neck, pulled really close to them. Yeah, it could seem like a really possessive kind of position. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example. And also, Lakeisha, I see where you put in the teammates, roommates involved, and bartender from the bystander example. Thank you for that. I think it took it a minute to come in. So our next piece of this is looking at kind of personal responsibility. And there's a lot that goes into this idea of personal responsibility. And you can see from my slide here, I've got a picture where there's somebody that appears to be drowning. And instead of helping them, there's a lot of people holding up their cell phone and videoing it or taking pictures. And we need to talk about this idea of the bystander effect for just a minute, which it's also called the diffusion of responsibility. But basically, it's the idea that individuals are more likely to help when they're alone than when they are in the company of others. And this study of the bystander effect actually started with an incident that happened in New York City in 1964. So there was a woman named Kitty Genovese who was attacked and murdered outside her apartment building. And the story goes that there were approximately 38 people that heard her cry for help, and no one did anything. This incident went on for about half an hour, and eventually she was murdered. And after it was over, somebody called the police, and they arrived fairly quickly. So this story, this question, as this story got out, this big question was, why did nobody do anything? Why did nobody respond? Why did nobody take that responsibility? And it really served as a catalyst in the social psychology field for developing the ideas around the psychology of helping and this kind of research around the psychology of helping. And so we actually have a lot of information now about some of the barriers for people in terms of reasons why they might not actually intervene. And I've got a couple of this listed up here, and I will share those. I'll share those with you. And if you wanted more, later, I would be happy to share even more. But basically, some of the things that might keep a person from intervening, a perceived cost. So the cost in this scenario is often social. So what is the cost to me if I do something or if I intervene? Am I going to make somebody mad? Am I going to be ostracized from a group that I care about? What are the potential costs to me? And is it worth it? Kind of this idea of the higher the cost goes, the lower the likelihood that I'm going to intervene. We know from research that people are more likely to intervene in scenarios where the potential victim is somebody that is similar to them, even right down to similarly dressed. We know that people are more likely to intervene if they're in a good mood, and less likely if they're in a bad mood. From a judgment standpoint, people are more likely to intervene if they think that the person who's being impacted is innocent in some way or has done nothing to has done nothing to kind of bring on the behavior. And then also if the norms in our community are to intervene or to get involved, then that is also going to impact whether or not we take that responsibility and jump in. And what's important, I think, about sharing this is that, there are times when a person does not intervene because they are legitimately afraid, or it may be a dangerous situation for them. But there are also times that a person might choose not to intervene because that person doesn't look like them, or because they're in a bad mood, or because they're kind of sitting in judgment. And our job when we're really talking about this is to help people understand that they got to dig a little deeper and, kind of dig deeper and ask yourself, like, what is holding me back? And, another thing that comes up often is, it's not my business. I don't want to get involved, and it doesn't cost anything to check in with somebody and just make sure that they're all right. And so, how do we dig a little deeper and kind of take some responsibility to actually kind of push ourselves to get involved or to help make some kind of positive impact? So with our steps, we talked about paying attention, we talked about noticing that something's wrong and taking responsibility to actually try and make that positive impact. The next piece is probably the most important, and that's what the actual skills are. So if I've taken responsibility and I'm ready to actually take some action, then what are the skills that I have? And there's actually a lot of different ways to, to do bystander intervention. We're going to talk about the in-person skills in a second, but I will also share that there are ways, and you all are probably better at this than I am, to do bystander intervention via social media. And there's ways to send messages, kind of proactive messages, to our community in a lot of different forms, using art and music or digital games, etc. But to send messages to our community about what kind of community we want to be. So if we're talking about, watching out for each other, we're talking about, we're a community that doesn't condone violence. How do we send those proactive messages as well, which is part of what you all are going to be looking at with your social norms campaigns. So, but for now, I want to focus a little bit on this idea of the in-person intervention. So I'm going to show you guys another video. It's also very short. And this one doesn't even have sound. So what I want you to do is, and I want you to watch the video and then just see if you see what happened. There's something that takes place. So just watch first to see if that's clear. Okay. Just in case you missed it, I'm going to play that one more time. And I also want you to start looking at who are the potential bystanders and how many do you see? All right, so just in case there's a lag on your computer, and again, I'll send this link for you later, but basically we see this gentleman drop something into her drink as she walks off. So I'm letting it play again. And then I'm going to pause right here and I'm going to ask you to look around and count those potential bystanders. And just think about who all those potential bystanders are in the room. And so for the sake, oh, I see a question. See, definitely 2, maybe 3. Okay. Yeah, so we have this woman in the black here. We have this woman here in the blue and whoever she's talking to who may have seen it. And remember, we're just thinking about potential bystanders. This gentleman here, the gentleman standing by the thing, he may have been one. Oftentimes people say maybe the bartender. So you usually get, at least 4 or 5 people who may have actually seen what happened here. All right, so we've got some potential bystanders identified. So I'm actually going to come back to that in just a second. Because again, that goes back to this idea of, let's identify who our bystanders are and kind of what happened in the scenario. And now we're going to look at, first I'm going to pause. I see 5 at the most, those that were right there in front. Awesome, thank you. All right, so you all may have heard of these, the 3Ds. I'm going to talk about the 3Ds with you, and the 3Ds are ways that we can actually, the different options that we have to intervene. And, again, we've got multiple scenarios here for ways that we could intervene or kind of make a positive impact. And the goal is to, again, think about what keeps you safe and helps de-escalate. But also, as we talk about these, think about which particular D that you might be most comfortable with, because most people have kind of comfort zones where they're more likely to do one than the others. All right, so the first one is be direct, and this one is pretty straight. So, this involves directly addressing one or both of the people involved, using I statements, expressing concern, directly offering to help in some way. We could use humor or body language. but just basically, or even just directly address the offense itself. All right, so the next one, squirrel, is creating some kind of distraction. So what are the things that we might be able to do to interrupt the situation so that we don't have to, kind of to interrupt the situation to keep it from escalating? So there's a lot of different things, sometimes people talk about, just the simple act of asking somebody what time it is, or, spilling a drink, some of those kind of things are distractions that might actually interrupt the incident and help us get more information and get someone out of the scenario. And because I am a nerd, I'm going to give you another example here, another GIF here, just for fun, of a distraction technique. All right. So then our third D is delegate, and this is all about asking for help. Bystander intervention doesn't have to be done all by yourself. There's lots of ways to enlist other people who are around, other friends, to try and help figure out what to do in these different scenarios. So obviously these penguins are working together very well. So we have direct, distract, and delegate. So if we go back to our bar scene and we think about those 3Ds, I want you guys to take just a minute and I want you to actually think about some examples of each. What are some ways that a person might directly intervene in the scenario? What are some ways that a person might cause a distraction? And what are some ways that they might be able to delegate or ask for help? And I'm actually going to pause here for for a minute, because I'd like for you to respond to this one and just give me an example that you think you might be willing to do, for instance. But just take a minute and think about that. I'll show the video and then I'll put the 3Ds back up. All right, I see one response here. I see knock over her drink and apologize. Thanks, Lisa. Didn't know you were out there. Yeah, so we knock over the drink, then we're causing a distraction. I see throw the drink away, which is kind of that one, depending on how it's done, could either be a distraction or could be considered a direct. And if I have any law enforcement folks in the audience, they would say, no, don't throw the drink away, save it. But that's bystander 201. If what we can do right now is throw it away, then spill it, get rid of it. Let's see. I see somebody who's saying, tell the bartender. So that's a great example of a delegate. So we're gonna enlist the help of someone else who is there, who can help us. And let's see. For me, I would be the one to delegate, getting everyone involved, making the person involved accountable, and pointing them out. And so yeah, that's kind of a delegate and a direct, because we're both getting other folks help, and then we're also directly saying something to the person, who dropped the drink, who dropped something in her drink. So that's a great example of how we can actually mix and match our Ds. Oh, you guys are doing great. Thank you. I see a direct response of, hey, dude, did you just put something in her drink? So directly addressing him. And then I see or switch her drink out with mine and take her drink to the bartender and tell them, which is a fantastic way of kind of, could be a distraction and a delegate in that one. So thank you guys. Some great ideas. And I think this really helps kind of drive home the idea of the 3Ds and the different ways that we can get involved, because so often people will say, well, I would be the direct person. I'm the one that's going to just walk up and be like, what are you thinking? Whereas other folks in the room would say, there's no way that I would feel comfortable being the direct, but I could cause a distraction, or I could delegate, and ask someone else for help. Those are things that I could do. And so the goal of this is to get you thinking about, what would you do? How would you be able to actually help in this kind of scenario? So the next piece of this is looking at different ways that we might be able to intervene using social media. And I'm actually going to ask you guys too, since you just did such a great job responding to the last one, if you will take a minute and type in different ways that you might be able to use the idea of bystander intervention via the interwebs, via social media scenarios. Like, just take for a moment, because I wonder if some of you have encountered that already. So just take a moment and send those in for me if you have ideas of how you might be able to be an active bystander online. Okay, so maybe you didn't like that one quite as much, that question quite as much. Oh, there we go. Here's some questions. There's some responses popping up. Let's see. So commenting directly on content that is inappropriate. Yeah, absolutely. You could comment on it. You could also flag it or report it. If somebody's being harassed, you could even vote it down. Vote down abusive content, something I've got. Oh, I see an idea from Shawnee about sharing posts on Facebook about positive bystander intervention actions. That's a great idea. So using social media in a positive way to actually try and encourage people to take action. Great suggestion. Thank you. Yeah, and so some of the ideas that I've got up here is, if we see some of these things happening online, then, again, we can vote things down, we can flag it as harassment, we can post supportive comments, to kind of try and be that positive voice. And it's possible also that you might want to reach out to the person who's being victimized, either publicly or privately. We can take screenshots of things that we see. However, I would not report something. I would be careful about reporting something without the other person's permission. And then, of course, we can also use humor or GIFs as a way to try and to kind of de-escalate the situation. So those are just some things to think about in terms of, and to continue thinking about, what this looks like in an online situation. And also, there's a campaign out there that you all are probably familiar with, the It's On Us campaign, that actually highlights bystander messages. And they've got lots of materials that you can pull from, that you can look at to get some ideas of how to do this work digitally. So check that out if you haven't. But that brings us to the kind of wrap up here of our 5 steps of bystander intervention. So again, we've noticed that something's happening. We've recognized that something's wrong and needs some kind of intervention. We've talked about taking responsibility. We talked about the skills of the 3Ds. And then the last one is just, the actual doing and the taking action. So I hope that it's helpful to kind of look at it from that perspective. One thing that I did want to include here is that if we are in a scenario where we have, somebody who's disclosed something to us, something that's happened to them, I think it's always just helpful to reiterate kind of how we respond to that. I've got a question. Okay, here we go from Lakeisha. So going back, possibly getting to know people by asking more interpersonal questions about themselves. So that might be a way of kind of reaching out to someone in a social media setting. And she says, knowing who they are may make people more comfortable, and may make people more comfortable knowing who they are dealing with when asking questions instead of not knowing. That makes sense. Yeah. So whether we know the person or not is actually a really good point when we're talking about bystander intervention. If we know the person who's potentially being victimized, that makes a difference, and it depends on the situation as to what kind of difference it makes. But often for us, it makes us more likely to intervene if we know the person, and it may make them, kind of the point that she's getting at there, may make them more likely to receive our help as well, rather than when we're in situations where it is a stranger. There are still things we can do in situations where we don't know the people involved, but it may look a little bit different. So thank you for that. So just out of due diligence, I wanted to just make the point really quickly that if we are in a scenario where someone's disclosed to us, or we know that something has happened to someone, especially in terms of sexual violence, just kind of a reminder that the best thing that we can do for someone in those scenarios is listen to what they have to say and to be empathetic with them, but also to believe them and to let them know that we believe them, and then support whatever decisions and whatever decisions they make. One of the things that happens when we are a victim of sexual assault is that our power is taken away. So one of the best things that we can do is empower people who've been in those scenarios to kind of take that back and take the ownership to make their own decisions, and then support them in whatever they're deciding to do. And then if there's a place that on campus or in your community, kind of know what those places are, where a person might be able to go to get more help. And if you don't know, when someone discloses to you, that's okay too, but maybe be willing to help them, to help them find those places, because they're out there. Um, the support structures are out there for us. We just got to be able to find them. So just wanted to take a little moment and point that out, since we did address the issue of sexual violence within the presentation. So one of the quotes that I like to kind of to put in here is that this is an African proverb, and it says, "If you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping in a closed room with a mosquito." Um, I think that is a great way of saying that we all can make a difference, no matter how big or small. So I am going to stop for a minute and see if you guys have got any questions for me. I'll pause for just a second, and then as we start to wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about how we might be able to, or some ways that people have talked about bystander intervention within within campaigns, like social norms campaigns. So. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions right now. So I do want to give just a couple of examples. So for some of the schools out there who've created social norms campaigns, and I swear this happens every time when I click the slide, the question actually pops up. So, oh yeah, good point. So my colleague from MTSU just pointed out that one of the things that we know from a research perspective about bystander intervention is that sometimes when one person stands up, other folks are more likely to follow suit. So sometimes all it takes is that one person who's actually willing to say, you know what, I saw this, or I'm not comfortable with this, and other people will follow. Whereas if nobody says anything, then that won't happen. So that's a great point, Lisa. Thank you for that. So these are a couple of examples of posters that our schools, Carson Newman and Vol State, created last year. And they have incorporated kind of this message about see something, say something, do something. So those are a couple of ways that some of our schools have incorporated this idea of bystander intervention. And I've got another comment here. Oh, I have a great question about when do we hold people accountable when they're recording what is happening during a situation? We see this happening too often. So I've got a couple of different answers to that. And, there's obviously, it all depends on the scenario in terms of, the specific situation. But, there could be times when recording a situation is what we feel like we can do. I mean, for example, if we are seeing something play out where we're dealing with people that we don't know, and it may be like a domestic violence situation or relationship violence situation where we don't feel like we can, jump in at that moment, but maybe recording it is something that we can do to then offer to, the victim to say, if you want this or if you'd like to have this, I recorded it so that you could share it as evidence. That's kind of one positive way that recording something might actually help us. It might actually help us document the situation. So there are scenarios where that can be a good thing. Now, if people are just standing back and kind of ogling the situation and just videoing it for kind of shock factor value, well, so then that's a different scenario. And I think that the choice is ultimately going to be up to you whether you want to intervene with that person who's just recording, or whether you want to focus your energy onto the situation at hand. So if you're looking at directly intervening or causing a distraction, you may be able to do that on your own, and you may choose to expend your energy there. If you need help, if you're looking at a delegate scenario and you need that person's help in order to actually do something or make a difference, then I think that is absolutely a moment where you can say, hey, I need you to put the phone down. I need your help. Like, we need to do something. And again, that also goes back to, do you feel safe? Do you feel safe holding that person accountable? Is it somebody that you know that or that you have a relationship with? So those are all kind of the things that I would think about when we are in a scenario and we see somebody recording. So that's a great point. Thank you. So I've included a couple of examples of bystander programs that are kind of out there right now. So for those of you, and especially specifically with bystander programs that are looking at a diversity of issues. So we know that at UT Knoxville, they've created a bystander program that's looking specifically at alcohol and drug use. And so that is a program that is out there in terms of how do we help hold our kind of intervene to help people make healthier and less risky decisions around alcohol and drug use. The Step Up is out of the University of Arizona. And they have a bystander curriculum that looks at many different bystander scenarios. They include suicide, they include sexual violence, they include alcohol, they look at harassment. So they have, and you can actually go onto their website, and I can actually send you guys the links to these. I think that might be helpful. You can go on their website and actually look at all of that. It's all there and available for free. And Cornell University is the same. They've actually created a bystander program called Intervene, and they've created videos that address a multitude of different topics around bystander intervention. And they have a really good one. They in particular have a really good one around hazing. So I'll send the links to all of those just so that you guys can kind of those are all free tools that are out there. So you can kind of see those if you're interested. And then also in Tennessee, we have the Sexual Assault Center, which is in Middle Tennessee. A couple of you actually heard Sharon talk last week, but they're looking at doing some bystander intervention with bartenders to try and help bartenders be capable and have the skills to intervene when they see these things happening, because so often your bartenders or your restaurant folks, the hospitality field in general, those people are going to be on the front lines of a lot of this. So these are all things that are happening out in our environment around bystander intervention that you might be interested in checking out more. So because so often when we're talking about making good decisions, and kind of being healthier and helping our friends make less risky decisions, so often all of these different issues overlap and intersect in ways that we might be able to look at and address when we're talking about bystander intervention. So that is all I've got for our presentation this afternoon. I will hold on for a couple minutes to see if anybody's got any other follow-up questions, but otherwise we're actually going to get done a little early. While I wait for just to see if we've got any additional questions, I will say that I'm actually not sure what happened at the beginning there with the PowerPoint, but I apologize for that. I'm glad we got it worked out for you all. So my computer's being finicky this afternoon. So I'm not seeing any at this point. So I will just remind you all again that the next step is going to be working on and creating your social norms campaigns. And Ashley's going to be reaching out to you about next steps. You are welcome to reach out to me about anything you saw today, or anything to do with the grant. Whatever you need, let me know. And we will be looking at trying to create these campaigns over the months of March and April. And it's also definitely time to start thinking about what kind of event you'd like to pair up with your campaign to enhance the reach that you get with your social norms event in the fall. So with that, I don't see any questions, so I'm going to assume we're good. So I appreciate you guys' time this afternoon, and I'm going to end the webinar. So thank you very much. We'll be in touch.